जब बेहोशी टूटी तो मैंने देखा कि सदर दरवाजे का ताला टूटकर जमीन पर पड़ा था। सिंहासन पर बुत रखा हुआ था और लोग आरती उतार रहे थे।
22 दिसंबर 1949 की रात्रि में भगवान श्री राम लला अयोध्या में अपनी जन्मभूमि पर प्रकट हुए।
Some of those videos can be bought in the West London suburb of Southall, and earlier today our camera crew visited Southall to hear the view from the streets of Britain.
My feeling is it should not be happen like this, and everybody should, whether we are Muslim, Sikh, Hindu, whatever religious we are, we should respect religious for each other's.
It's been there for so many years. I don't see why they should attack it now, and for what reason. I don't see that, you know. I don't see what they can achieve by it, and it's only going to spread more bloodshed.
We think, because it's spread to England and the temples are now being blown up here, we think that's totally wrong, yeah?
Yeah, see, what's going to happen is it's going to spread more, and they should stop it now. While
The government should stop it, really.
It's up to the government.
The Indian Prime Minister says that they're going to build another mosque there, doesn't he?
And then there's going to be more trouble with the Hindus saying, yeah, they don't want it there to be built.
See, because there's more Hindus
Because
than
in a way,
Muslims
Hindus
in
have got
India,
their rights because it was their land first, if you see what I mean, because of their history. Rama.
This matter, the Indian regime was aware of this situation a couple of months ago, and they should put some couple of thousand troops there, and they didn't done it. So they let the Hindu fanatic people come there and demolish the holy mosque, which is the house of God. Mandir to me is a house of God as well. I love Hindus. I love Sikhs. They're all my brothers. But the hatred is created by the fanatics and the devils in India, like Advani and his followers.
It will spread to this country. People have a lot of mixed feelings about what's happened, and they ain't gonna let this stand. I mean, there are a lot of, as you know, in Britain, there's a lot of Asian community between Hindus and Muslims, and because there's a lot of community, there's gonna be a lot of interracial views and mixtures and things like that. So I think there will be. This is not going to die down. I reckon there's going to be more violence, and the police should be aware of situations. And like in Southall, nothing's happened so far, but I hope it will happen. Yeah.
The Prime Minister should resign.
Yeah, there should be new government there.
He should build up a force to stop and cut down what's happening
all
there.
the trouble.
This trouble ain't going to stop just like that.
It's going to be a big issue.
Yeah.
And the issue is already big in Birmingham. Yesterday, a Hindu temple was completely destroyed.
I was worshipping in the temple last week. I was worshipping last night. Although the temple has gone down, when we've put our murtis there, we did the worship before the murtis were protected, and we're still worshipping in this temple. We've had, difficulties before. We didn't have a mandir when we came to England. People had the faith. People set it up. This has happened. Tomorrow it'll be the same again. We will set up a mandir and we will carry on. Yeah? And that is the confidence that people have got. Obviously that at the moment is quite saddened, but people have got a lot of confidence to re-establish and start worshipping as it was before.
Just up the road, we visited the Oldbury Mosque, where Mushtaq Ahmed, the social worker, explained his feelings about what had happened.
On a personal level, I'm deeply hurt. It is a direct violation on a very law-abiding, peaceful community that I myself am closely attached to. Indeed, some of my close friends do belong to the Hindu faith, and I believe this criminal act has actually abused the friendship which existed for hundreds of years between these two groups.
We asked Mushtaq how he thought Hindu-Muslim relationships had been affected in this area.
Well, I feel at the grassroots level, amongst the youth in particular, I feel that the feeling is one of bitterness towards what's happening in the Indian government, really, and India, and how the media actually projected those images without any sensitivity or comment by any black leaders in this country. So we had material that especially the younger Muslims were bombarded with, which was very highly intensive and emotional, especially with the ethnic cleansing processes in Europe and so on, where Muslims are persecuted, etc., and so on. And once again, these images were very hurtful. But at the same time, no way could we relate that to any bitterness towards the local Hindu population, whom the Muslims have always enjoyed friendship with.
But not all Muslims share Mushtaq's view.
Well, particularly in Sandwell, I don't condemn what's happened, and I don't agree with what's happened to Muslims or the youths, whatever they've done in Sandwell, especially to the temple. But look at it the other way. What's it like to be on the other end of the stick if you're a Muslim? Now, this thing in India has been going on a long time, long enough. And the Indian community here, particularly the Hindus, didn't bat an eyelid what was going on. Now their temples are burned down, all hell's broke loose, it's all bad, we should have good relations. Where were the good relations when our mosque was being knocked down? That's it. Excuse me.
Joining us in the studio tonight are Anila Bonnerjee Graham, an economist who has worked at the United Nations, a veteran of the Indian independence movement, a stalwart of the Congress Party, and a close friend of the Nehru family for many years. Gopal Gandhi from the Indian High Commission, Praful Patel, who describes himself as a moderate Hindu leader, and Imran Khan, a practicing solicitor from Southall. Join us after the break. Welcome back. Praful Patel, if I could start with you first. Do you think this is the end of the India we have known for so long? Or do you think that the Indian political system will survive this crisis? Because I don't think there's any doubt it's a very serious one.
The situation is extremely serious. What has happened gives us deep anguish. In the name of religion, people retaliate and get involved in this mindless destruction of religious places. Is simply not on, it must stop. But I have a great faith in the Indian democracy, in the Indian secular system, and the Constitution of India, that I personally think that it will survive in the end. It will probably go through a crisis initially. It has been going through a crisis for the last 5 years. There's been a lot of problems in Punjab, in Kashmir, with the rise of the BJP, VHP. But I think it will in the end survive because the Congress party is totally committed to a secular India. You have other political parties which are totally committed. I think last 4 days has shown that the BJP is now isolated because what has happened, I think, is backfired. They didn't anticipate this to happen, but obviously it is bound to have repercussions in the immediate stability and other things. The killings that are going on in India is totally unacceptable. I hope it will stop soon. I'm also worried about what's happening in Britain, for instance, amongst our community, because what has happened, it really saddens you that we are tarnishing the image of the Asian community here. There are attacks on several Hindu temples. I just hear there's an attack on a mosque in Newham. This doesn't help us at all. But the Indian system will survive in the end.
Gopal, Gandhi, can you be as confident that the system will survive this crisis? If so, how?
I'm not just as confident, Tariq Sahib, I'm absolutely sure that India will survive. And I think the reason why I feel absolutely confident lies in part in what Mr. Patel just said. And that is that India is today not just anguished, but absolutely determined to do something about what has happened. The groundswell of criticism across the country, from the president down to innumerable individual citizens, reassures that India, as again Mr. Patel suggested, and I think you have at the back of your mind, Tariq Sahab, is of course a nation, but it is also a civilization. And in that sense, it is not just a system. System is a very small word to apply to India, which is in a position to measure time in yugas, in eons, not just in decades and years. And in that sense, I have absolutely no doubt that the liberal evolutionary impulse in India will prevail over the illiberal and narrow.
What do you think?
I think the situation is very serious indeed, and I think we would be foolish to underestimate the seriousness of it. And it's a cause of great sorrow to so many Hindus like me who were brought up in a secular tradition to see what is happening in our secular democratic India. But I have faith in the Indian people, and I feel sure we've been through a lot of difficulties in the past. This, I may say, is one of the worst. But I think eventually, given patience, we will come through in the end. It may take time, but I don't feel this is the end of my secular democratic India.
Well, I wish we had present with us, and we tried very hard to get them, representatives of the VHP and the BJP, but they did not wish to participate in this debate. But I do feel obliged to put their views to you. For instance, if I were a VHP leader or activist, I would say to you that everything the three of you have said is pie in the sky, that the India you believed in has changed, and they would say that the majority of the Indian population support them on the temple. Let me finish. They would say that their electoral standing has jumped and rocketed over the last 10 years, that there have been massive turnouts at their demonstrations, and that if an opinion poll was held in India, as some have been, they show majority support for breaking down that temple. How would you reply to that?
I would reply to that to say that look at the elections. They didn't get in spite of all their propaganda. They're still a minority party in the government of India. And I think that it's very silly to play on the fact that they were able to rouse the rabble and get them to go and break down the temple and play on the worst instincts of people. And I think it's quite unfair, and I think it's quite inaccurate to say the majority of the Indians are on their side. I know that I left India some time ago, and therefore probably you will think I'm not a good judge of what's happening in India, but I do keep in very close contact, and to me, certainly, I do not believe that the majority are behind the BJP. I'm only sorry that nobody came from these Hindu fundamentalist parties so that we could have spoken to them across the table and you've put their point of view, but it would have been nicer to be able to tackle them themselves.
But Praful, if you look even at the situation in Britain, where the VHP and the BJP are very well organized amongst the Hindu population of this country, it indicates some support. It's not an organization which is without substance. We may not like it, you may not like it, but basically it is a serious political party which has not yet, as Anila says, won an election, but come the next election, who knows? What if they win the next election in India?
Well, I personally feel that there is serious possibility that the BJP can win in the future. But let's remember one thing, that India is a very large country comprising of a large Muslim population, Sikhs, Christians, and Buddhists, and many other faiths. And frankly, if you're just going to bring up issues out of history because your pride was hurt 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, and you just bring these issues up and you use them politically to gain advantage, I think that's not right for India. It will tear India into pieces. Indian democracy and secularism is a very great asset. It's a stabilizing force in the region, in the Indian subcontinent. And I personally have a lot of faith in the majority of Hindus. Now, I'm a Hindu, a very staunch Hindu in a Swaminarayan faith, Vaishnavite, but I'm a very secular Hindu. And I was brought up by my mother to believe that God is omnipresent, is pervading everywhere. It doesn't have to have a temple at the Babri Masjid. You can build a temple to Rama anywhere else in Ayodhya, as the Indian government has offered to do. Honestly, these kind of forces, and I agree with you that VHP, and they are very powerful, well organized, strong cadre, excellent workforce, but they, if they exploit this issue, they will probably be breaking India into small pieces like Soviet Union has gone to pieces.
Gopal, you were talking earlier about India in a civilizational sense, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But civilizations have been known, very ancient civilizations, to go through real aberrations, real periods of barbarism, real periods of irrationality. What makes you so confident that this cannot happen in India? After all, what we have witnessed is precisely one such instance.
I think the fact that there have been similar instances in the past, although not of this immensity and of this barbarity. And India has been able to cope with those. And I think it has every time learned a lesson and gone on. This is not to say that every time we've had a convulsion, we've been left with fewer extremists and more liberals. No. But in the totality, I think the people of India see every instance in perspective. They know that they are part of a stream. And incidentally, as a friend reminded me today, India is named after a river, which is perennial. And it could be dammed occasionally, it could be diverted, it could be muddied, but it is self-renewing. And I think they know that.
Let me come to another point. It is what strikes me as very strange about the last week's events in India. There was a meeting of the National Integrity Council 2 weeks before this. Every single political party in India, with the exception of the BJP, advised the Prime Minister, Narasimha Rao, to dismiss the UP government and to take strong measures to save the mosque, because everyone knew this was happening. Yet Narasimha Rao, instead of listening to this advice of all the secular political parties, instead went and got, so it is said, an assurance from the BJP that there would be no such action, and relied on that assurance. I mean, surely this was extremely naive. The Uttar Pradesh government, where Ayodhya is situated, was in the hands of the BJP. L.K. Advani, the BJP leader now under arrest, had said many, many times that this was the aim, was to capture the mosque and build a temple. How could the Indian Prime Minister of a supposedly secular political party have relied on these people?
I think really that it's a bit of a shame to blame Mr. Narasimha Rao, because he is a man who believes in consensus, who believes in conciliation. Okay, he gave the BJP a long rope. I hope they'll hang themselves with it, but that's by the way. But it was before the High Court. They were told that they weren't going to do anything. They were given assurances. Maybe if he'd been really tough and gone in, it might have been even worse. I think when you think of what happened afterwards, when they took over, they did it very quietly, they didn't shoot people, and they managed to disperse the crowds. And I think if you get inflamed too easily, then it doesn't help the situation. I know many people blame him, but in situations like this, you mustn't become as violent as the other party. I believe in conciliation. I believe in consensus. Okay, it hasn't worked out. We've had to take over the Uttar Pradesh. But I still think that given time, when people realize what is happening to Muslims all over the world, it isn't only in India, think what's happening in Bosnia, one's heart goes out to that. And I mean, we have so many Muslims in India, what is it, about 200 million, and I'm sure that we won't be dragged into this fundamentalist nonsense.
See, I have been in India, in and out for the last 4 months, and I've been observing the situation on the ground. I do agree that it was bad judgment, but Narasimha Rao has been carrying on with a dialogue with all the people involved, the Muslims, the Hindus, the BJP, and everybody. And I think he put faith in these negotiations. What really went wrong was that perhaps the BJP had a secret agenda. If you see the first pictures that came in from from Ayodhya. There were people equipped. They must have gone with a view to destroying the mosque. There were assurances given to the court, and perhaps the government believed those assurances. You're right, last week I was in Delhi. There was a lot of demand from across the board to dismiss the government. It was a possibility, but I think the opportunity was lost. But what I do welcome is an unequivocal assurance on the part of Narendra Singh Maraf government and the President of India that the Indian tradition of rule of law, democracy and secularism will be now maintained. And they have to move in very quickly now, politically, to assert their authority all over India and stop what's happening. I do hope that in the next few days it will happen. And if it doesn't, it will be a very sad tragedy for India.
How do you all feel about the fact that L.K. Advani, the leader of the BJP, which is a legitimate political party in India, the leader of the opposition in Parliament, has been arrested, charged, and no doubt will face a trial? I mean, surely this couldn't be very healthy for Indian democracy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're facing a situation where an assurance was given by opposition leaders to the court, the apex court of India, the Supreme Court. And if you violate the orders of the court, I mean, that's the last straw in a democracy. Rule of law has to prevail. And if people who violate the orders of the court, I mean, what else would you expect in Britain, for instance, or anywhere else in a democracy? And India is a very solid democracy, and I have nothing but salutations for that country. And the experiment there is very important for the region, for the world as a whole.
But let's follow that argument through. What if this Indian democracy, as a democracy, at a subsequent election, either the next election or the one after that, votes in with a majority a BJP government, and such a government then proceeds to change the fundamentals of the Indian constitution? How do you think one should react in those circumstances?
Well, that would be very serious indeed if that happened.
But it's possible.
It's possible, but I don't think it's probable. And I really think the one mistake that has been made, I think it was a mistake to arrest the Advani. I think that that might stir up more passion. I mean, it's a very good idea to ban the parties, but I don't want Advani suddenly to become a martyr because he's been arrested, and that's my one fear.
If we could now move on to the effect of the crisis in India to this country, where we have large communities of Hindus and Muslims, and there have been many other things happening in Britain for some time. But there have never been clashes between Hindus and Muslims in this country. There has been no communal conflict within the Asian community as such. Imran, you're a practicing solicitor who takes up many cases, knows the community intimately in West London. And yet you told me earlier today that you'd arrived here and that a mosque near where you live had been burnt. Could you tell us about that?
Just a stone's throw from where I live is a mosque, and apparently a number of people smashed a window and were pouring petrol through that window, were seen running off by a woman, and apparently one of the individuals involved is being questioned at this very moment at Forest Gate Police Station.
This happened today?
Today. That is my understanding of what happened. Attempts were made to get details, but we haven't got those details. And it's clear that there has in the past, just to go back on what you're saying, there hasn't been that clash. And what was said earlier about the way that fascism and communalism and the interrelation between the two, my understanding of India, and limited though it is, the way that I see it is that the Muslims have been seen very much as scapegoats, very much in the same way that Hitler used the Jews, and very much in the way that the black communities in Germany are now being seen. And it's along those sorts of lines, if you want to make those sorts of comparisons, well, that's similar to what's happening in Britain now, with the black communities in times of recession are targeted as those that are taking our jobs, our houses, and so on. And you see the way that the state and the government has attempted to tackle that solution by such things as the Asylum and Immigration Appeals Bill, and so on and so forth.
But so, listen, if we get to the situation of 4 temples being burnt, a mosque being attacked today. I mean, this is something very new.
It is new, but we had a similar type of thing with the Salman Rushdie affair, with the rise in Muslim fervour and so on. And in that situation, there was a rise in world politics of Islam and so on and so forth. Now, young black people in this community, young Muslim people, young Asian people, and if we talk about Muslims for a moment, I myself am Muslim, they have nothing in this country. They're attacked, their houses are attacked by the white community. They need something to hold on to, they need something to look towards, and a lot of young people do look towards their roots. It's an obvious way to go, and it's an obvious way for young people because they've got nothing here. The community here does not accept them. So going back to their roots sometimes means going back to the communities, the religious communities from which they come from. In Newham, you have mosques every 100 yards. I mean, there are a great many of them, and you see young people there. I go to mosques and I see what's happening, and there are these young people, young boys, young men, who are actively involved in going around the houses and converting other people, and shouting about that people should go back to Islam and so on and so forth.
But this is very different from say, the 70s, where the youth of the time in the communities were attracted to far-left groups, to Black Power groups, to the Labour Party, Young Socialists, to whatever. Now that is gone, and they're turning to religion.
Exactly, because those areas have disillusioned. They've let them down. I mean, look at the history of the left and so on, and you see that they did not offer anything to young black people. And now that those communities are turning into themselves and fighting out. I think it's it's a very positive situation, but my difficulty with it lies in the fact that they're turning to religion. I think that has caused its own problems, as we can see. And I do not condone the actions of the Muslims who have attacked temples and so on, but I can understand where they're coming from and why they're doing it.
See, what has happened, you know, you're talking about 60s and 70s when we were involved in struggles in racism, civil rights and human liberties and what have you. What has happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that a lot of fundamentalist groups have cropped up in Britain. And this is imported from the problems in the subcontinent. And you see them now getting pockets of them very powerful. The Sikh extremists, the fundamentalists, the Muslim fundamentalists, and the Hindu fundamentalists. And within these groups, you have so much of village, caste, communities. The political scene has changed, Tariq, in the last 10 years in Britain, that these groups probably have become more powerful now. I mean, what Mr. Siddiqui does in the Muslim parliament, I certainly don't condone him at all. And you know, likewise, whatever the VHP or the RSS are doing in Britain, perhaps they are not as extremist in the sense that they don't resort to violence. But you have these groups now. For instance, I was talking to my niece yesterday, in their English school, a private school, lots of Muslim, Pakistani and Hindu children, do you know, they came to blows in the school. This is very sad. This has never happened before. We've had Indo-Pakistan wars, and you didn't see this kind of situation happening, like destroying temples, destroying a mosque, and throwing petrol bombs and all that. But this is a new development in Britain, which some of us have to recognize as an evil. And any evil of fundamentalism or any kind of terrorism is an evil to the civilization, not only in Britain but throughout the world.
Just returning to India for a moment, a number of analysts have suggested that if communalism was a problem simply isolated in the BJP and the VHP, it could be solved. But that the real problem is that communalism has infected many so-called secular parties and sections of the police and army. Now, I think that is where the danger lies, that the communalists, the fundamentalists, will win their case by default. Gopal, how do you think, let's be concrete for a minute, how can communalism be fought? I mean, we can't fight it by pious wishes and pious hopes. There have to be concrete measures, there have to be actions, but what?
I think the government takes a lead in that exam. And we have, throughout our 40 plus years of independence, had a government which is firmly committed to the ideal of secularism and has therefore moved against communal forces in all their manifestations. As you remember, in 1948, when Gandhiji was assassinated, communal organizations came to be banned, and the whole country understood that and realized why that was necessary. We have subsequently had several occasions when firm action has had to be taken, and the government has been endorsed by public opinion throughout. There has not really been any occasion when there has been a tremendous wave of protest in the country, either measurable in terms of election or any other parameter, protest against action taken against communal forces. The people of India have realized this. Concrete action by the government is the concrete step which people recognize and which they endorse. Now, what has happened in the last few days is another instance of such tangible action. There is absolutely no doubt that the hideous act perpetrated in Ayodhya should not have been allowed to occur. That it occurred in the way that it did is perhaps because of the betrayal which Mr. Patel mentioned. But whatever that be, there is now a commission of inquiry which is going to examine the various steps that led to that ugly and traumatic episode. A judge of the High Court of Allahabad is going to decide this. And I have no doubt that he will go into it very closely and will get public cooperation in that. Because in Allahabad, in Uttar Pradesh and in Ayodhya, there has been absolute bewilderment and amazement that this should have happened. And even though we are speaking in terms of BJP and VHP as one cohesive force, I think observers and analysts can detect gradations even within them. And there have been not just expressions of surprise and dismay, but I think of regret, which is very wholesome and which again shows that concrete action by the government following a ghastly episode like this is recognized and followed, and people cooperate.
But 600 people have died in 4 days.
600 people have died in 4 days, and in parts of India which did not know communal carnage, which especially in the south of India have known nothing but tranquility. And what does one ascribe this to? One ascribes this to the machinations of communal forces, often disguised as religious leaders, as saints who have constituencies of their own, but who, in close alliance with political forces, and political forces often not recognizably of this or that party, motivating the thugs and the criminals of that area for reasons of power and self-aggrandizement. And it is the innocents who suffer. In all these places, you were mentioning events here, and we're wondering why things haven't really happened to identify the culprits. In India, this is again the same story, Tariq Sahab. The perpetrators slither away, and it is the innocents who suffer. This has happened, but I'm fairly confident, I'm sure you are too, that as in the past, the virus cannot be prolonged by these very elements, because they will then have to identify themselves. They are creatures of the night, of the shadows, and they cannot but identify themselves if they prolong this. And given daylight, the picture will change.
You see, you mentioned the 400 people who are dead. It gives us a lot of pain and anguish to see that has happened. But there is this tiny minority of extremists who use the religious message, fundamentalist message, and exploit it. And what has happened in towns in Gujarat and Maharashtra that I've been talking to on the phone is people are taking advantage of this situation. What has happened is a very sad tragedy. It should have never happened. But the fact that it's happened, people are taking advantage of it. I'm sure that given a few days now, the government will assert its authority and peace will revert to India. But there is at times the external element that disturbs the Indian peace. Don't forget that. I was at a meeting at the Indian High Commission yesterday, and there were Indian Muslims who were expressing their anguish as what happened to temples here. And they were all saying that all of us have to work together. But sometimes, you know, Tariq Ali, the problem occurs from the non-Indian Muslims, external factors, be it in the region or from the outside. And this has happened not only with the Hindu-Muslim problem, but perhaps with the Sikh problem or the Kashmir problem or other problems. India has now got to come to grip with this crisis. Perhaps what has happened has, I think, given a shock to the whole nation. That's the feeling I get. I'm only taking an optimistic and a hopeful sign that something would happen in the next few weeks, that the crisis will resolve itself. But BJP, had they carried on negotiating and not forced the issue, you know, things were really going fine. The Muslims who were talking to the BJP, they would have probably considered that, right, you want to build a mosque here, fine, but don't press us anymore, because don't talk about the other 5,000 sites, which perhaps Babur and others had turned them from Hindu temples into mosques. I mean, there had to be a line drawn, but there was this magnanimity building up amongst the Muslim community to give way to the Hindus to have a temple to Lord Rama. But because they forced the issue, I personally feel politically it has misfired on the BJP.
Well, I think this is a very optimistic view, and all of you have a perfect right to be optimistic. I am not so sanguine. I have fears. But on that note, we'll bring this discussion to an end. Thank you, all of you, very much for participating in it and being so good-natured. Thank you, and good night.
The Black Bag is back at its normal time tomorrow evening to finish the story of the man who tracks down Asian runaways, the bounty hunter, tomorrow at 8. All that glitters is not gold, and for Trishna, a glamorous social life can't hide the fact that she wants to better herself. Shishi Kapoor and Sanjeev Kumar star in tonight's Hindi movie. Next.